listening to the Lead Like No Other Podcast, episode 85. On today's episode, we're going to talk about employee loyalty and how important that is. And especially, I think, in today's environment where we might have people that are remote or we might have people that are on the front lines, and how do we treat them in ways that they want to remain focused on what we're asking them to do. My guest today, Heather Younger, is certainly somebody who is an expert in this area. She runs a company called Customer Fanatix. She's also a TEDx speaker. She has an Amazon bestseller called The 7 Intuitive Laws of Employee Loyalty that we're going to be talking about. And she also runs a podcast called Leadership with Heart. I really enjoyed this episode with Heather in talking about how do we create environments where employees do feel engaged. And there's so much to this. Again, I'm Patrick V, and this is a Lead Like No Other podcast where I'm not only obsessed with interviewing those that are inspiring others to do great things like Heather Younger, but also in uncovering the research that demonstrates that we all have the ability to lead like no other. And it starts with ourselves. So let's get into it. Heather, thanks so much for being on the Lead Like No Other podcast. I really appreciate having an opportunity to talk to you. And your company, Customer Fanatix with an X.com, resonated with me for a number of reasons, because when you talk about the customer, really, it's about the employee first. And I think that's so important today when we talk about disengagement and organizations and how do you create engagement. I think oftentimes organizations forget that, to me, their first customer is their employee. And if they understand that, if you treat them right, everything else sort of falls into line.
It does. And there's some complexities to that. I think about companies that might have that philosophy, but they might not be fiscally sound, for example, right? And you have to have kind of a mix of both. And it's amazing how much I'm just getting smarter every day. I love the fact that I get to learn every day from things that people might see as failures of other companies or of myself, or things I've done, right? Or it's like things that are just like, wow, that was a home run. But I definitely think that when we look inward, so I'd say first, like, look inward, ourselves first. I'm learning that I think self-leadership is the most important. And so from a leadership perspective, I think leadership is the thing that drives a lot of the stuff that I do. So it's been an evolution. It's been an evolution for sure.
Yeah. You mentioned leadership driving this, and you're obviously running your own company now. What was the sort of driver for you to start doing what you're doing now?
Well, I have to, it's interesting. So I kind of think it goes way, way back to when I was a kid, but fast forwarding it, it was about 6 years ago. I worked for a company that was going through a merger of 5 companies. And I knew it when I came aboard, but I took it because I wanted to own the entire customer journey. And so I went on, and pretty quickly I could see that when the merger was happening, that the culture was going downhill. Nobody trusted each other inside the new companies. People's titles sounded awfully similar to titles of people that were coming aboard in other companies. And people were like, are they taking my job? Yeah, it was a lot of that. So what happened is a lot of people inside of the place I was at in Colorado, they were coming to me that people weren't on my team or were on my team, immediately, and saying like, what is going on? My manager not saying things, like no one's telling us anything. And I saw this person over here, and just all the whispering, right? Water cooler talk, that people weren't trusting people. And I went to the head of HR and I said, listen, we need to do something about this engagement and this trust, this lack of trust. And she's like, you know what? You're right. You should go do something about that. I'm like, what? I was at that point, I was running customer experience for the organization, external customer experience for the organization. And of course, I'd been a manager of teams for a long time. And kind of like this, after I thought about it for a second, I was this culture bearer for the organization where, when I see things happening that were great, I would always uplift and recognize people, whether they were on my team or not. I always wanted to highlight the good that was happening inside the organization. So she just thought me the right person to do it. So I did it. So I created a employee engagement council and included people from all the other companies on that. And within 6 months, things started to change. We started to force them to talk to one another. We put them in fun situations where they start to get to know each other. And then the mistrust, the doubt, the fear started to wane a little bit, but we all knew that there was that this merger was happening. And I knew that there was going to be some layoffs happening because they had hired all these big people, paid a lot of money, and couldn't afford all of it. And the product wasn't going as good and growing as quickly and selling as quickly as they wanted. So at that point, I just realized the layoff happened, I get laid off. And yes, it was an owie. It hurt. Oh yeah. I was the breadwinner of a family of 6 at the time. Big, this is a big deal. But I realized right in that moment, that they needs that organizations usually are lacking that person who's a catalyst to bring people together, to seek a common ground, and to be the voice of employees back to the leaders about what it is that their people need, because they're either not taking the time to find out what their people need, they don't care what their people need, or literally they're just too busy doing other things, and that is not a priority. So I love the fact that I feel really called to do the work, to be that voice, to be the catalyst, and to help leaders understand what their people need in order to give them what they want. So I tell you what they need so you can get what you want.
Yeah.
Right.
You bring up such an interesting point too, in terms of being that voice back to leadership, and how they decide to hear that is a whole different piece to it. My experience has been oftentimes that coming in from the outside is that employees give me the real answer, where they might give somebody within the company just the right answer, and
Yes.
we're really the opportunity to really an eye as to what's really going on.
Yes, I always say, so my organization, the mission, or my personal mission, is to help organizational leaders and their employees find their truth. Okay. They find their truth, not my truth. I help them do that through employee focus groups, creating culture teams, evaluating employee engagement survey comments, reading every darn comment, filtering that up, letting them know what the main themes are, and then getting back to them. I have found that there's some people, smaller percentage than I would have thought, that are not as receptive to the feedback I provide. I have gotten really good at, because again, I've been in this like customer space, employee space, having to be really diplomatic, but also being direct all at the same time. I'm a lawyer, so all those things, right? Like all that stuff mixed in together, right? I'm really good at synthesizing, not overcomplicating it for the executive leadership team, giving them key themes and recommendations that hopefully they can buy into, and letting them off the hook for, like, what I mean by letting them off the hook is making this for them. They are overwhelmed by themselves, particularly if it's a publicly traded company. They got like shareholders, they got the board, they got all these things going on. It's like, listen, all we need from you is a yes, the resource allocation, and me and HR or whomever it is the internal sponsors are, will get it done. But then we may need you to do videos to show that you're, if you're, again, if it's a remote or wherever it's at, we made you do not roundtable. Well, roundtables might be a part of it, but like town halls, that's what it is, where you are showing your support for the initiatives that we're doing. But in the end, I'm not expecting you to do 5,000 more things now that I'm telling you these 3 things that your employees really need. If, however, you listen to what it is I'm telling you that they need, and I've heard this in aggregate, and I've heard it across the country and the world, right, that if you do these 3 things, you will see huge differences in this, and that. Just trust me on this. And they'll trust me up to a certain point until they start to see proof. And they see proof because we make sure, like if they're, for example, some of the companies I work with are best places to work. And so we'll see if they're already there, do they move up? If they're not there, do they get there? And so some of that is proof. And then when they get to go to these, when the execs get to go to these kind of recognition ceremonies where they made it to these spots, then they see, okay, it looks like this stuff actually works. It's actually changing our culture. Our employees are actually feeling better about stuff. The trick is helping HR grab the business analytics that connect to the people analytics that really means something to the executive leadership team.
Yeah.
Because it's those analytics, it's those numbers, it's those end results that really speak to them. And so the key is not just like the best places to work and things like that. It's how does that tie to the business, your key business metrics? And are you seeing any movement of the needle in that regard? And so I kind of talked to them about that, but it's trying to get real clear. And that's why I have IX as Customer Fanatix. It's not a fanatic, it's Fanatix, because the IX means it's driven by metrics. It's driven by data. This is not just a gut check. This is data, either quantitative or qualitative, and we're using that to drive the voice of the employee forward in the culture.
Yeah. Now, along those lines, you also have a best-selling book, right? Mm-hmm. The 7 intuitive laws of employee loyalty. And I keyed in on that word intuitive.
As you should.
Yeah.
As you should, because it is, right? I think like all the stuff that you talk about, I talk about, there's like a zillion of us out there talking about this, probably not a zillion, but you know what I mean? There are a lot of us talking in a different way, all different angles about very similar things. And they are intuitive. These are not rocket science. You can research this for 25 years and guess what? You're going to come up with the same exact thing I put in there because it's true. And I think that's the key, is that people just don't know. They overcomplicate it. Like even when after I do a keynote, I try to lay out, 5 things or whatever things you want to do, 3 things, 5 things you want to do differently to leaders. And at the end, I say, don't overcomplicate this. Yeah. please just use what I've said as a motivation you need to evaluate what it is you're doing for your people. What emotions are you producing in them? So my theory is that employee experience and loyalty are driven by emotions, and that leaders, organizational leaders who really have the power to create the experience for the people that are inside those walls, they actually drive the emotions for those people. And that determines whether they want to stay with the organization or they want to walk out the door. And so that's my theory. That's what I talk about. And so it's trying to help them understand what is it that you do, you personally, from the for the emotional intelligence perspective, from the communication perspective, what are you personally doing or not doing, or saying or not saying, that makes your people feel unimportant, disrespected, unheard, not valued. What are you doing? What are you saying? What are you failing to do? And once you start to evaluate that self-leadership focus, right? Then you start to see things change in your neck of the woods. And so we can't try to control the entire picture, but we can control us individually. And if each of us controlled us individually, boy, what a better world it would be, right? Yeah.
It's when you talk about metrics and the intuitive component to this, oftentimes I will use research to validate common sense. That's really all it is. It's the research that's out there in a number of areas that you talk about around behaviors, personalities, the impact that it has on the organization. It's really using that research to validate, because if I say it myself, it doesn't mean anything. But if I can pull in research that says, here's where this has been studied over and over again, that this has an impact. And all it is common sense. That's the only reason I use that.
Yeah, exactly.
So the intuitive part that you talk about. So from there, when you talk about the intuitive component to it, how do you help people? There are two areas that I know that you focus in a lot, is around emotional intelligence and personality. How do you pull those two things into an organization?
The beautiful part about Customer Fanatix is I'm able to see, I know more about their organization than they do, because I'm taking their survey, because most of them don't have time to really do this. Me and my analysts are, but I actually personally review all the comments. We have 5,000 comments. So I've done that every cycle for 2-3 years. I know your organization really well. So when I see that, I can go, okay, these are the three. Let's say communication is a thing that boils up, a lack of communication. Maybe it's the method in which you're communicating. Maybe it's the mode in which, I don't really know, but it depends on what they say, right? And if it looks like it's the leaders or a group of people, supervisor level, that are ones are really missing the bar as far as communicating effectively, showing appreciation, whatever that might be, then I'm able to make that business case through the data that we need to have training. And so then that's how we introduce DISC, which is the communication and behavioral style training. The reason why that's important is because usually a lack of communication is the key for conflict. It's the thing that brings conflict on in most cases. It's the thing that, people are getting confused by things because there's just misinterpretation of what's happening. And so the DISC really helps to increase awareness. And so the awareness portion of it is how I'm able to connect that to the emotional intelligence side, because self-awareness is that doorway to emotional intelligence. And so once they know that, once they realize, oh, wow, I am like that. I didn't realize people saw me that way. So increasing that awareness that way, it doesn't make them perfect. It makes them better. And that's what I'm mostly interested in doing, is helping people get better, improving every day, and kind of being more aware of who they are, how they are perceived, how they impact others, what's happening in other people's worlds, all of those things that when you think of emotional intelligence. So I don't necessarily talk to them in all of those ways, because I don't want to use jargon, but I do want that when I talk about the awareness part of it is kind of simple, and trying to really get to the importance of understanding that is key.
We spoke about this before we started the actual podcast around emotional intelligence. And I think even that word at times, if you're to use that right, can throw people off or make people defensive, because what do we think? Oh, emotions, this is a little too soft. What good can come out of this from an organizational standpoint if we're talking about emotions? But as you said, really, when we come in, all we are emotions. Either we're frustrated, happy, sad, content, whatever it might be. We show up as emotions. And wouldn't it be best to understand how to identify what those emotions are and to be able to see them in other people? That's really what the skill set is.
It really is. Yeah. And that's a great kind of, way to boil it down. I had gotten to this point. It was like, how do I simplify how do I simplify this? And of course, my clients who are COOs and CFOs, they don't love the idea of me talking about emotions, right? When I talk, even when I do my keynotes, I try to provide lots of examples of what this means. When I talk about creating positive, because I hope what I'm hoping happens, people that are sitting in the audience, they're seeing what happened to them before as from their manager to them, or they're seeing themselves on maybe what they just did to their employee that morning. So in the stories I'm telling, I'm hoping they see themselves one way or another, either as the person who did it or the person who received that negative thing that created the negative emotion. And so it's through the stories, I think, that I am able to illustrate that to people. But most people are like, they'd be like, emotion? Well, I don't want to. I want to. What's the numbers? What are the numbers? Well, I can tell you the numbers, but I'm still going to talk to you about this.
What are the results? Right.
Yeah.
Let's get down to what the results are.
Yep.
As it relates to DISC, and I am a big fan of DISC. I think that there's a lot of value there. How do you use that within an organization? Is there anything that you do to collectively use that, or is it all individual?
So how I do it, or kind of even how I was set up to do it, is I do an individual evaluation of each person. So they do the assessment. I speak with them offline before a workshop, a team workshop. And so I did that with those people we talked about earlier with the group of oil and gas guys, multiple different times where I went out and spoke with them and did that. And so it works really well in teams, but I like to do offline work first to make sure that they can ask me personal questions. I can get deep into their areas of improvement. And then when we get together as a team, it's more of a fun reflection. It's kind of an interesting insight, and the questions and the small group stuff that breaks out makes them realize, wow, I mean, the guy that's on the pad and the guy that's in the office in accounting, they kind of have similar worries. There's obviously more safety over here in the field, but for them to see that when they're in that small group and then figure out how they actually need to talk to each other to get more stuff done, is, to me, that's when the light bulbs come off. I had one guy, he was in the training and he was not feeling it. He was like, he was cussing. I won't say those words. This is not me, and this is so. And he was just literally a huge naysayer. And I was afraid that particular workshop was going to go off track because he was just like not feeling it. And all of a sudden, like 3/4
So he was saying like the profile that was given to him was not who he was.
And then the entire process was a bunch of bull. Basically, it was just like everything. His profile, he was just like, and he was doing like and talking to people next to him. It was really throwing. And I was keeping my cool. I was like, everybody else is feeling it. I'm going to just try to, I'm going to make sure that everybody else understands, And so, so about 3/4 of the way through, he goes, oh my God. He didn't say that, but he said a word. Oh my. And I'm like, he goes, this is so me. Oh my. And he just was like going off. He couldn't really. So of course he became a believer towards the end. And then at the next day, I was training another cohort inside the same company. And he comes up to me and he goes, Heather, I talked to my wife about this last night. I am such a believer in this. I am so sorry. He was just like, oh. So now, interestingly enough, I am coaching him on the emotional and social intelligence side. So he is, he's taken that assessment and he wants to, grow in his leadership. So it was just kind of, this guy is in DISC, he's the D, and he's a person you would think of the lowest self-awareness, who's like the lowest. And in the end, he's the one who, out of everybody, you would not expect, wants to dig deeper and to find out how he can be better so he can lead more effectively. Just like, wow. So
it's like a double convert out of him. You've got him on DISC and emotional intelligence.
Exactly. It's like, oh, yeah. Love it.
In regards to organizations, when you're dealing with top level, mid-level managers, frontline, what do you think is most important in terms of the work that you're doing?
I think with anything in the space that I am, I feel like meeting people where they're at is probably the most critical point, whether I'm a consultant, whether they're a supervisor or anybody, just relating to one other person. I think it's meeting them where they're at. So at each one of those levels, it's figuring out where they sit, what their life is looking like, because then I'm able to more fully use my voice to basically portray theirs more accurately. Because if I go in as a cookie cutter and just assume, okay, you manage people and then that's it, I might not know exactly where they're coming from or where they're sitting. And then it's just going to be hard for me to get in their shoes. And I need to get in their shoes quite a bit in order to advocate for them. So I don't know if that's what you were getting to, but with each of them, I treat them kind of individually. Now it depends, like there's some that are executive leaders that are wanting to move up in if I'm doing coaching and they want to move up, I always tell them I'm not going to be somebody who's going to help you, do statistical analysis and presentations on stats. That's not what I do. I'm more of the side that's going to be relational. So if you're looking at how do I strengthen my relationships with the people that are the higher ups, the people that are my colleagues, my people, how do I do that? There are conflicts here. There are barriers here. How do I do that? That's the place where I come from. And so when I go in to work with any of those leaders, I'm going to be figuring out what those barriers are for them, and trying to help them come up with some solutions to that and move past them.
Yeah. And certainly that answers much of my question, and I ask this not knowing the answer, but really I think in terms of even the experience that I continue as I every year learn more about the environments that I'm in, thinking where is the most impactful role that we have in terms of what we do. And as much as I enjoy working in an executive level, I look down on a frontline basis and think this runs, when we talk about employee engagement, so much of what happens, because I don't see the the president of the organization on a daily basis, but I'm impacted directly by the person that I report to directly, and that ripples out everywhere. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah, that's really hard. I feel like they have different impacts and equally as important impacts. And now that I have been doing more executive coaching, it's really not the thing I led with. It's actually not my main thing I do, but it just happens to happen either from keynotes I do or from like other work I do in the employee engagement space where they need it and then they're looking for coaches and then I'm there. But what I see from the executive level and the importance that they play in engagement is that they provide the access. They open the door. There are green lights or red lights. So let's say I'm talking to the supervisor and the supervisor needs to, like a frontline supervisor, needs to access training for their people. Okay. But at this point, training is not available for that level in the organization. Let's say the training is only mid-level manager and above, or it's not the training for their people. It's not even available to the people. And so that supervisor doesn't have a lot of power. They'll go to their middle level manager, or the middle level manager might go to the director or the VP. But in the end, if I have access to the C-suite, I then, me personally, based
So
upon all of
they're
our
driving it.
organization, I can say, well, there's some things I saw when I saw this in the survey comments. It was a really big, whatever. I could talk about that. And so again, I feel like they do a lot of green and red and orange lights. And if we can get them to change the signals, then all the way down to the bottom, things just start to change. So I think there's a huge impact. I do agree with you that frontline supervisor, when we're talking about them, when we talk about being cared for and feeling cared for, it starts with that frontline manager. It does go up to every line up there, up to the C-suite, but it starts with them. And so, we stay for how we feel, and because we see them every day, they produce more of the feelings. And so, there's just a huge amount of impact for the individual employee. But above organization, when we're looking at organizational culture, that C-suite is so impactful. Yeah.
Yeah, and important. I completely agree in terms of
Yeah.
if they're not modeling what we're doing or you're doing on the lower level, then it just breeds this cynicism of employees saying, well, wait a minute, it's important for us, but why aren't you doing it?
Yes,
Why don't you
absolutely.
follow through?
And I love to be able to work with them on the quirks they have, because we all have them, and to help them overcome their own internal barriers, because most every barrier we have is in our head. And so I like to be the person that helps them get out of their own way and lead more effectively. So,
yeah. Do you do much around values when you go into an organization? Do you look at their values in terms of behaviors? And I ask that specifically because one of the things that I will often run into is not necessarily a value, but one of these taglines that we always hear within organizations that our employees are our most valuable
asset.
Right. And I think in terms of most organizations, especially those that are disengaged, if you were to say that, employees would chuckle saying, no, the photocopier gets basically more love than I do.
I do look at values, and even sometimes if I'm talking to a leader and there's someone that's, it's kind of subordinate, I think if we're thinking of a hierarchy and there's someone that's subordinate to them and they are not living the values, then I ask them, like, what do your values say? And do you have that aligned inside your performance review process? Like, are your values inside there so that you actually can hold people accountable for that, inside that performance review? Because often they're there, but no one's really enforcing them.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's and no one's enforcing them from the top to the bottom in most cases. But there are some that you'll land on, some organizations where they take, things very seriously. It's interesting. So I teach on the emotional intelligence on DISC. I'm talking about caring leadership. But you know what? If I see an employee, one of my team members, and I've done it, if I see one of my team members acting counter to our organizational values and even our team culture and values, I will call them on the carpet and say, listen, I think you understand how important these values are to me and to the team. I noticed that you did this, which was counter to what teamwork means inside of this organization or inside of my team. It was really undermining. It was not fair to the individual. And so I'm going to write you up. This is counter the values we have. And I have done that before, not a lot, but I've done it and it really pisses me off, and be honest, because it takes a lot to get me mad. But when I see someone doing something that's immoral or like really hurting a team member purposely, like doing something that's just really not conflict. I'm not talking about just natural normal conflict. I'm talking about something that's undermining and sneaky and all that. Yeah, not okay with me at all. And so immediately they're like, they see Heather, it's just like soft, person, and all of a sudden they're like, whoa, I did something not so good with her. And it's like, I've had to do that a few times in my career, and it really shocks people. So I think that when I talk about, when people talk about soft skills, which I hate the word soft because it's super duper hard to do, emotional intelligence, the communication, behavioral style, and understanding your impact and what they need from you for you to fill them up so they feel heard. When I do all of these things, it sounds so touchy-feely, but I bet you that same person who's doing that to the people, if they feel good from their leader, they are like, they're walking with their shoulders up. So I always like to put them, like, think about the time when your manager made you feel like poop. What happened?
Right.
And so those are the kind of things I like to bring up at all levels. I don't really care what level, no one's beneath it, I guess.
Yeah. And I would agree with you in regards to me, these are the strongest skills. EI is a strong skill, not a soft skill.
Yes.
When you really understand the impact that this has, your ability to call somebody out was emotionally intelligent. It wasn't out of weakness that you were able to do that, right? Because the weak thing would have been to ignore it or not want to have that conversation. And I think you bring up a bigger point as it relates organizationally when we talk about values and do we live these values or don't live these values? Because what you did was say, you're not living the value. So you made the individual realize that, oh, these things are being looked at. And it sends the message to everybody because other people were watching, even if what's Heather going to do here? Let's see.
Yeah, they were watching.
Put her money where her mouth is.
They were watching. And the interesting thing, what you say though, the interesting thing about all this is that sometimes it's not lived out in aggregate of like the entire organization. But how I look at this is I am an individual leader that has an individual team. I am choosing to live it out in my team, and you're on my team, and thus you shall choose to do that. There's no option to live out the values in my team. You see where I'm going with that? So
totally.
I maybe the CEO isn't living it out. I can't help that. I can't control that. I can control me and you. Like I can make sure you're living out values. And I mean that I don't. It's like I said, it's the one thing that gets underneath my skin when I see people do it, especially when they do it to one another. It's like, we're a team, like we are in this together. We are trying to do our best work together in our own like little hubs, right? And so for you to do this other thing to this team member when it's undermining and it does not promote a positive culture in the team. And that's what's most important.
Yeah.
Right. Because all the teams make up the organization. So.
And you bring up such an important point there about the self, because that's all we can control is ourself, regardless of what somebody else does. And I can't tell you the number of workshops that I've been involved with, especially around emotional intelligence, where, somebody in the group will say, oh, who should be in this workshop is Sally, or Jim should be here. And everybody's chuckling like, oh yeah, they should be. And I'm like, they may need to be here. I don't know, but they're not here. And all you can control is how are you going to interact next time with Jim or Sally? Because that's all you can control.
So true.
Jim or Sally may never come here and never want to figure this out, but that doesn't impact what you do.
Exactly. And totally holding people accountable on the team and saying, if you're going to be that type of team member, you need to be thinking about another place to go. and I'll help you find that place. But if you aren't in line with the values and you don't believe the values are important, and that teamwork for me is like, like a top one.
Boom.
And if you don't believe in like, valuing your coworkers, I'm sorry, you can't be here. Now we can have some serious fun together if you're interested in living by those values, and so you have to have those conversations. So while I think there's those times where the strong skills are in place and the communication and all that, knowing that like you just talked about, that it takes emotional intelligence to be able to call someone on it and make sure that obviously you're living it. We have to make sure there's alignment here. So I'm holding you accountable, but it's because I'm holding myself accountable. If I do that kind of stuff, I'm going to feel bad for myself that I shouldn't have done it. And if someone calls me on it, I'm going to say, you're right. I let myself down.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah, exactly. And I've had to do it. So, I've had to apologize is what it is.
We really didn't talk at all and I know we're coming close to the end here. You mentioned 7 intuitive laws. Mm-hmm. Can you speak to those?
Yes. So kind of quickly, the biggest one was giving them really good managers. So that's the number one thing. And in my next book, The Art of Caring Leadership, I'll be focusing really on the leader and what that looks like. What does caring leadership look like? The actual brass tacks of it, right? So giving them great managers is the first. And then making sure that we appreciate our people. Appreciation, they said 77% of employees said they don't feel valued for the work that they put in, but 55% said they would leave an organization for one that values them. So we have to make sure that appreciation is the key. It's the heart of our organization. Create a culture of appreciation.
Yeah, and so simple, right?
It is. It can be very simple.
This is not about bonuses and trophies. It's just so simple.
It is very simple.
So I don't mean to sort of stop you, but along those lines of appreciation, what do you find is a stumbling block within an organization around appreciation? Or do you see one?
I don't think there are barriers. I don't think there are barriers that they can't remove. I think there are barriers that they place there. I think I told you, I think most barriers that exist in our lives exist in our minds. So there are very few things we can't accomplish. I mean, obviously, we're not going to be able to jump on the top of a building, off the building, not die, right? These are very intuitive things, again, right? But I think in the workplace, when we think about appreciation, it's the leader or the coworker or the customer, everybody just taking personal responsibility to say, I want to make someone feel good. With the leader, with the manager of the team, it's asking each individual what it is that makes them feel appreciated.
Yeah.
Not everybody feels appreciated with the exact same thing.
Yeah.
So that's maybe be one barrier is to understand, or obstacle would be the thought process, I guess, is to figure out what motivates that person. One of the other things or laws in the book, which really is probably the most important thing out of all things, because it emanates everything else. So that would be listening. So listening to your employees and do something about what you hear. Listening and do something. So first listen, then do something. I know it says what I'm saying. It's intuitive, but a lot of times employees are giving feedback to HR, to their managers, and they rarely hear anything back. And when they do hear something, it's negative.
Yeah.
And then they don't know even if the organization is making movements and taking strides based upon feedback they've heard, they rarely tell the people that they had anything to do with it. So the reason why it's important that you listen and act is that then there's power in the voice, and that people feel like a level of importance and significance. And all of us want to feel significant. So that's why that's so important.
Yeah. And back to alignment again. When you're listening in and you're doing, there's alignment there. It demonstrates that you've really been heard.
Yes, alignment is so important in every aspect, isn't it? In all the work we do,
totally.
You have to be. Having them, the other one is making sure that they are growing professionally, that you are offering them opportunities for growth, whether it's inside the organization from training or outside, whether it's a career path, like job shadowing. There's a lot of different ways to do that, but the key is that employees are seeking fertile ground. And I don't care if you're a millennial or not, all of us want a place where we can grow. And if they don't find that fertile ground, they will go somewhere else to find that. They will get it somewhere else. And so the key is, if you're trying to retain your people, you want to create the organization that has that fertile ground there. People want to stay there with you, right? Another one is, which is the last one really, is paying them equitably. And I always like to tell people now that pay is important, but it's the last thing if you're doing it equitably to start with. So if people can't feed their families, if they aren't like the, Maslow's hierarchy of need, if they're not meeting their basic needs, money is going to be the number one thing. If they're meeting their basic needs, money is not the number one thing. It is the last thing. And the other thing is about appreciation, giving them great managers, listening to them, making sure they grow, things like that. Those are going to be the things that really are going to make a difference. It's so funny how you're just getting all this stuff from the book. Go get the book. Go buy the book. Go buy the book. And then you can read all of this.
Oh, I'm sure there's so much in here, right?
Yeah,
there's more in here, I'm sure.
Yeah, so I just think I would say, definitely go check it out, and then you can just bunny ear it, and put stickies on it and write stuff on
Yeah.
there. But and then so the next book I have on caring leadership is going to be mostly drilling down to that first concept of giving them good supportive managers. That was like really in the end that was the crux of all of it, based upon all of my research and the experience I have looking at who is it that's actually driving the experience of their people. Why do people want to leave or stay? So it may not be their manager only. It could be the C-suite we talked about, where they're not doing green lights. They're doing tons of reds and yellows. And so then all of those managers up the ranks are pausing or having to act and behave certain ways because of the yellow or red light that's happening. So when I talk about leadership or caring leadership of managers, it's not just the supervisor, the frontline supervisor, which they are the most impactful, I agree. It's all of those folks that can kind of turn the knob on decisions that need to be made to make the experience better. Okay, so increased payroll, more paid time off, the gym inside the place, whatever that is, right? They are the ones that have to say yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. So it's all the way down. And so what does caring leadership look like? I'll be defining that more. And it's based upon my podcast that I have, Leadership with Heart, all those interviews I've had with leaders that have tried really hard to do it really quite well, but not perfectly. And then on the other end, it's all that information I receive from employees on all the surveys I've read and all the focus groups I've been in. So I'm super excited to have that boil up into some really key concepts that leaders can really hopefully go about doing in a way that produces much better experiences for their employees.
Yeah. I loved how you said that too, in regards to leaders that are really trying to do it well, but not perfectly. I think that's the other component of this, is that we're all human. And I think when we behave in the right ways long enough, that we are given a little bit of latitude to know that we're going to make those mistakes. As leaders, nobody's infallible, right? We're going to make mistakes.
Yes.
And I want that leader that's going to be able to say, you know what, my bad. I was wrong. Made a mistake.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the best leader ever. I mean, if you're doing it every single day, all day, that's obviously a problem. We got to fix that. Right. But I think that's the best, that's the best leader. And that's the best part I love about the podcast I have, because then the leaders, I ask them, when was a time when you weren't the best leader? And what did you do to come out of that?
Yeah.
And that is when the beauty is that's the beauty right there in that moment where they're able to be vulnerable and tell us all, anybody who's listening around the world, right? And then how they came out of it gives us all solutions to come out of those things. So
it gives everybody else that reports to that individual, like, oh, they're human too. Like if I make a mistake, I can say I made a mistake because they did. Whereas if you deal with somebody that's always like, no, I don't, I'm always right, I'm not going to feel comfortable saying that I'm going to make a mistake if the person that I report to can't do that themselves.
So true.
And I love what you said, because when I will do work in that area, I will say, yeah, I want somebody that can say, I'm sorry, I was wrong, I'm struggling, but I don't want that person coming in and doing every day saying, made another mistake. It's not a person I'm going to follow, but I do want that to be in their ability to do that.
Yes, absolutely. That's where the beauty's at, guys.
Yeah. So to get your book, what's the best way for somebody to do that?
I'd say go to Amazon. You go to Amazon, look up the 7 Intuitive Laws of Employee Loyalty. You'll find that. And then also, again, if you're interested in more in leadership and listening to leaders that are on all walks of life, just check out the podcast, Leadership with Heart. And you'll hear all of those different people. And those are people who are leading teams actively. They're not people like me, where you might consider like thought leader or something. They're people who actually are in an organization.
Yeah, boots on the ground.
Managing, acting, right now.
And how about your website?
It's customerfanatix.com. I am rolling out a second one that will be heatheryounger.com, but that'll be probably in the next 2 weeks. So, but this Customer Fanatix, again, will be focused on helping organizations and their leaders and their employees find their truth. And that's going to be the only focus that Customer Fanatix will have. And so I'm super excited about that. I think that clarity with that business is going to help instead of it being everything to all people as it is right this second, peeling away much of that and really being able to meet the organization's need in that way. It's so important.
Yeah.
We aren't listening, and we have to listen better.
All of those links will be in the show notes as well for people to be able to track you down. I
Awesome.
want to say I really appreciate this conversation. Such an important topic, right, around employee engagement and treating it as though it's a customer. I love that approach to it. So thank you for taking the time.
Definitely. Thank you. It's been great.
Yeah, take care.
Yep, you too.
Heather did such a great job of talking about her own past experience in terms of the organizations she's working with and how she helps to create a level of engagement and where this needs to start from, which is at the top, and how she does that. And also talking about the 7 intuitive laws of employee loyalty, as well as what's next for her and her company in helping others to, in a sense, lead like no other. If you know somebody you think would benefit from this episode, I'd ask that you forward it on to them. If you haven't subscribed yet, come on, please subscribe to the podcast. And it would mean the world to me if you would leave a rating or a comment, because that's how this message of helping others to lead like no other continues to get out there. And until our next episode, I hope you're able to, 1, lead like no other, and 2, rise above your best. Peace.